Hi, this is Kristen from Sheer Goodness. Today I'm going to show you how I plant hundreds of tomato seeds every year. First, let's start with some of the materials that I use. We plant our seeds with plug trays. Here I have them laid out from largest to smallest. This is the size that I like to use for peppers. And either of these two trays are my preference for doing the tomatoes. You will need a pump sprayer for watering the trays. I don't like doing the bottom watering, I prefer from the top. But what's nice about this is the nozzle is adjustable, so you can create a really fine mist, so you don't dislodge the seeds at the beginning. I also like to use a dibber, and this is a handy tool which allows you to make a little divot or hole in the center of your cell, so you can place the seed exactly in the center. This other end can be used for removing the plants out of the plug tray later on. I also keep an inventory of an alphabetized list of my tomato varieties because yes, I am very much a tomato addict. I also keep a list of all my tomato breeding projects so I can continue with that work each year. So we're going to start filling these trays, but because we're in zone 4, it's still a little cold here yet and we can even get snow. So we'll be doing this in the basement of my house. I'll meet you down there. When should you start your tomatoes? If you look at a seed packet, it's going to tell you 6 to 8 weeks before your first frost-free day. In my case, that would be May 15, though typically I will go until Memorial Day. So I prefer to err on the side of planting too late rather than too early. The reason is, if they're in my greenhouse too long, they will succumb to disease. Secondly, the transplanting. It is much easier to transplant small tomato plants versus big ones. I'll never forget the year where they got so big I had to use a post hole auger to plant them. That was exhausting. I would much prefer to use a small shovel while transplanting. So for this reason, err on the late side. So here we are in my basement with the plug tray and the dibber ready to go. The reason I'm choosing the basement is because I have a cement floor and I don't want to get dirt and water on good flooring elsewhere in the house. So I'm using the smallest tray that I have, and this is my favorite. I believe this is a 200 cell. I'm going to start by taking potting mix and filling the trays near full or maybe roughly 3/4 full. Now a lot of people will use a seed starting mix, but I prefer potting soil. Now, one of the cons of potting soil is that people say, well, it's got all that bacteria and fungi in it, and that's going to cause problems. And it could. But my seeds are going to be in this plug tray for a very short period of time, in which they'll be potted up with fresh potting soil soon thereafter. So I really don't run into problems with that. I have seen fungus grow before if they're in the trays for too long. Another problem with potting soil is that you'll run across some larger pieces of sticks. But really all you have to do is just pick them out. It's not that big of a deal. So I'm using a small bathroom cup and I'm scooping into my potting soil and I'm going to start filling the trays. Now, once I fill them, we are not going to tamp it down. When they're full, I'm going to actually take my pump sprayer and we're going to spray these and let the water kind of naturally tamp it down and moisten it. So let's go ahead and fill these about 3/4 full. You can take your fingers and kind of break up any clumps of soil so it's finer, or remove any sticks, or if you were to run across any rocks. Don't worry about spilling on the floor, we will just sweep that up later. That's why we're in our basement. So it looks like they're full to the top, but that'll sink down when I spray it with water. So with tomatoes, we're going to plant them about 1/4 inch down. Kind of as a general rule, the size of the seed is going to tell you how deep you should plant it. So a tomato about 1/4 inch or less. But a squash seed that is large, you could plant that an inch down. Versus a celery seed, which is extremely tiny, you would surface sow that. And sometimes not even cover it, but just press it onto the top of the soil. So the size of the seed is a good indicator of how deep to plant. Another reason I prefer these small trays here is that I consider my spacing under my grow lights to be pretty valuable real estate. So if I have a cell that doesn't germinate, I'm not losing that much space. If I was using a big plug tray and one of the seeds didn't germinate, that's an empty spot with nothing in it that could have been used more efficiently with something that did germinate. So I feel like this is a better steward of my grow space and also of the potting soil. Now normally the brand of potting soil that I used to love was called Majestic Earth, but unfortunately I have not been able to find that for the last couple of years or so. I'm not sure if that's due to the current events, as I'm taping this in 2022, but nonetheless I have not been able to get that brand that I used to love so much. So this year I had to just get whatever brand was available to me locally, and it's okay, but I'm not exactly loving this potting soil. But you know what? Sometimes you can't be picky, and you gotta just get what you can get. But if anybody knows where you can get Majestic Earth potting soil, please leave a comment below. I'd love to know. So we'll be using popsicle sticks to label these cells. Now, when the plants are big in the greenhouse, I'll use an entire popsicle stick per plant. But when I'm just doing cells like this, I'm going to break the popsicle stick in half and use half of a popsicle stick. I'll be placing them on the ends here, and I'm going to be labeling them as a column. And I just use a permanent marker to label, to write on the popsicle stick. Later on in the summer, when they're actually out into the field, I'll show you a trick that I do on how to label my tomatoes and how I use the Florida weave technique to weave my tomatoes in. So some of these larger sticks here, just go ahead and chuck them aside. Here I feel a little rock, I'm just going to pick that out. Not a big deal. I'm just rubbing my hand across just to make sure that they're filling evenly, but I'm not tamping down. So once I get these planted, I find that my tomatoes will germinate in about 2 to 7 days. The soonest I've had is 2 days, and I think you can attribute that largely to the fact that I do my own seed saving. So year after year, I'm selecting for seeds that perform well in my Zone 4 area. On the other hand, I've had tomatoes take a long time to germinate, and the ones that take a long time to germinate are the wild species of tomatoes. So normally you have the Lipopersicon variety, but the wild species, which you typically think of as the currant tomatoes, those take a long time to germinate. And the seeds are exceptionally small compared to regular tomato seeds. So those I'm going to surface sow more shallow than I would the domesticated, more common tomato variety. And I know that they're going to take longer. Now, I do have plenty of heat mats, but I actually don't like using my heat mats for tomatoes. I reserve those for my peppers. Now, the room that I'm germinating these in does have a wood-burning furnace nearby. So that does help with the ambient room temperature. We'll be placing a dome on these trays, and that's going to keep the humidity higher and also aid with germination. However, as soon as they germinate, we need to remove the dome. We're just about finishing up here with filling these trays. Okay, now let's do a little glance over here and make sure we got any last little sticks or rocks. This looks pretty good here. So now we're going to take our pump sprayer, and I'm going to spray this from the top with a fine spray. So with a pump sprayer, you do have to pump it with your hand to build up the pressure. Okay, let's test it out. That's a nice spray here. So we're gonna, right now I don't have any seeds in here, so I can use a little bit more pressure because I'm kind of tamping it down with the water spray. So I could be a little more aggressive right now. This is like when you're planting a fruit tree, and once you plant that tree, you water it to kind of tamp down and remove any air pockets around the roots of the tree. I'm basically copying that concept. So I'm not tamping it down with my fingers at all, just using the water. Okay, that looks good. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is take this dibber, and I did purchase this from Greenhouse Megastore online. And you use the pointy tip to make a divot in the cell, and this is where we'll be placing the seed. You wouldn't have to do this, you can skip this, but the reason I like it is the seed will be perfectly centered in the cell. And sometimes, more in the larger cells, the seed can shift and then it'll germinate kind of on the side against the wall. I'd rather have them all individually centered. So it's a nice tool to have. So I'm going to go ahead and make a divot in each cell right in the center. So next I'm going to be making labels and placing all the tomato seeds in here. I'll meet you back after that. So I just finished placing all my tomato seeds in the cells, and I have my labels labeling each column. The next step is to cover this lightly with soil. This is really just going to be a dusting. And I will have to use my fingers to kind of break up the potting soil. Now that the trays are full, we're going to water it one final time. Grab your pump sprayer, and again we're going to mist the tray. One final tip I forgot to mention, when you're placing the seeds in the cells, you don't want to be leaning over with your hand full of seeds over the tray like this, because what can happen is you'll spill some of the seeds on the tray, and then you've just lost track of which varieties are what on the tray. So when you want to keep your hand on the back side of the tray and not lean over the tray when your hand's full of seeds, because I've never made that mistake before. So the next step is to cover this with a dome. The dome will sit on top like this. And because I used half popsicle sticks, the dome will sit on top fine. If I had used a full size of a popsicle stick, the dome would not fit on there. So make sure you do half popsicle sticks. The dome will sit on top. And we're going to wait for this to germinate. Like I said, it takes usually about 2 to 7 days. And when germination happens, make sure that you take the dome off. So in future videos, I'll be showing you a tour of my indoor lighting station, potting up tomatoes in the greenhouse, planting tomatoes, and many more. Stay tuned, and thanks for watching.